we're going to talk about doing center out stitching and reordering the sequence of our lettering. We're going to kind of do it as a combination, and we'll focus on that first. Center out stitching and changing the sequence of your lettering can be a little tricky sometimes, and so I want to go over that. We'll go through all the aspects of that. You guys can ask some questions, and then we'll go on into the regular class. Now, so I'm going to start off real basic. T for text. I'm going to come up here. I'm going to choose a font. I'm just going to put in some lettering. All right. Now, first off, really easy. Everybody will notice that when you put in lettering, it has what's called a group exit point. That group exit point basically tells the software where the string of characters are going to exit. Okay? I would say the majority of the time you never have to move that or manipulate it, but I want you to be aware of it, and you'll see why as we talk a little bit about this. Now, if we just want this to sew center out, okay, so we want to put this on a hat, we want to do center out stitching, but we don't really have an idea of where the center is. I mean, we know that it's somewhere over in here, but we're not sure exactly. Not a problem. We go T for text, we double left click to highlight it, we go to the text drop down menu, and we go down to center out stitching. Now, when I click that, it's going to automatically find the center, and it's not going to break up a letter. So let's just say that the center is inside this H. It's not going to break that H up. Now, what I can do is I'll generate my stitches, and then I'm going to go to slow redraw and watch it stitch out. Of course, this is my speed, very slow, very fast. We'll go on play, and you can see that the center was inside the H, but it didn't break up the H. It started with the C, and then it's going to go to the I, and then it's going to go to the R, and then go back and do the H and the rest of the letters. Now, center out stitching is very nice because what it does is it moves the exit points for us. You know, lettering does closest point connection. We'll see it moved it from the C and on the I, but then back here on the R, it's back to the forward direction. Now that brings us to something else. Now that this stitches out and we see it, it goes from, so C-I-R, and then from the R back to the H. Well, when we see that there's a jump stitch. There it is right there. It goes from the R to the H. So in that case, I would probably want to come in, hit T for text, highlight my H, turn on the trim command or the cutter command, restitch, and now you see I've got a dashed line. Now that is how I can do center out stitching. Now, let's expand on that a little bit. First off, let's say that I want to control where the center out stitching happens. Maybe I've got maybe this is my lettering. Now center out is going to be somewhere in the D, and it's going to process on the C. Well, I can actually go in here and tell it where I want center out stitching to work. I go T for text, I highlight the character, text, center out stitching, and then regenerate my stitches. And if I watch it sew this time, it's going to do the D, the C, the B, the A, and then jump across to the 1. So I can highlight the character that I want to be the center. I want to say that, and what I did was I said that I wanted 1, excuse me, I'm sorry, to be the center. Therefore, again, it's not going to break up that letter. It's going to go to the next one and start. So I can either let the computer figure out where the center out stitching is, or I can force it to be a certain location. Okay? Now, if I have 2 lines of text, right now, this is going to stitch out 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, let's go and think about that for a second. Maybe, for whatever reason, I want to go 4, and then 8, 7, 6, 5. So I want to reverse the stitching direction. Or in this case, what the software does is it calls it toggle stitching direction. So I can highlight my line of lettering. I go to text, and I go here, toggle stitching direction. Now what that's going to do is that's going to change my group exit point. Here's my group exit point up here on 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, it's going to end on the 4. But look what it did to my down here. It moved my group exit point. Now it's going to, when it stitches out, it's going to go 4, 8, 7, 6, 5. Okay, so toggling your stitching direction will reverse the order that it stitches. Okay, now it's all based on this group exit point. Customer earlier called and said they were having some trouble with lettering, and what would happen is they weren't really sure why, but it would sew a certain number of letters, and then it would come over and sew some more and then jump back. So it was kind of skipping around, kind of strange. What had happened was their group exit point, and I'm going to tell you what, I'm going to highlight this and delete it, put something else in here. Now, what had happened was that their group exit point had gotten moved. Okay? Now, see where I moved it to right here? Now, watch when this stitches out. Okay? So, that group exit point basically is telling the software where it's supposed to exit. So if you ever see something like that and you really didn't want it to do center out or didn't want it to sew in a strange direction, look for this shape right here. And make sure that it is on your somewhere on your last character. Now it's real easy to move. I can hold down my control key, select it, click and drag, and again, it doesn't have to be on the edge or on the end, or it just has to be somewhere on that last character. Okay? Now, the other way that we can change our sewing sequence is by separating our text. All right? Right now, because this is keyboard lettering, at any point I can highlight it and change it to a different font. Okay? I can use center out, I can use toggle stitching direction, all of those features. But what I can also do is I can select it, go to the text drop down menu, and go down to separate. Now, once I separate it, this becomes like I had digitized this by hand. Every item is now a separate item. I can no longer get T for text and highlight this, okay? They're all individual. But what I can do is go to View and Snapshot, and this shows my sewing sequence. So if I want to change something, if I want to change the sequence, I just click on an item and drag it to somewhere else. This now becomes the first item that sews. All right. What this does not do is it doesn't manipulate your exit points. Okay? So like for example, you know, I made this the first thing that stitched out. Well, let's just say that, okay, this is the first item, and I want this S to be the second item. I'm going to drag it over. Now I've got this piece and this piece. Okay, that's all fine and good, no problem. But if that's the case, then I want my exit point to be here. And if it sews the S and then the P, we'll just move that P over, then I want the exit point on the S to be here. And then of course it goes from the P to the A, and I want the exit point on the P to be, you know, about right here. All right? So now I've kind of manually done what center out stitching does. But sometimes when you're doing a lot of manipulation and a lot of changes, separating the text can make it a little easier and give you a little bit more flexibility. Yes, you lose your text properties, and at the end of the day, if you come back in here next year and want to type over this, it's not going to work because the text properties are gone. But it does give you other options to work with as well. All right, so does anybody have any questions about center out stitching or reordering text? To manipulate my stitch effect settings for a satin stitch, which is what we're talking about right now, it tells me that I'm using a satin right here, and I can click on this icon to edit. Now, if it doesn't tell you what you're using in this box, you're not editing anything, okay? To get back to where it shows you, T for text, double click, there's satin. Now I can go to this icon to edit my satin stitch. Now, first off, just to get this out of the way, this doesn't affect you guys. Okay? Don't even worry about that. These are the settings that you're going to be concerned with. First off, your pitch. This also is called density. 0.4 is the default. If you're not sure what to use, don't change it. Leave it at 0.4. If you want that stitch to be a little bit tighter, lower this number. Now, use the down arrow to lower it. That goes in 5/10 increments. I can highlight and put in anything I want. 0.39, 0.38, 0.37. I never recommend ever going below 0.30 unless I'm doing foam, puffy foam. Okay? If I'm doing puffy foam, I use 0.18. Now, going the other way, I've found that on a lot of wicking material, 0.53 work, 0.5 to 0.55 works pretty well. None of this is set in stone. Always, if you're not sure, try it first. Okay? This is just based on some of the wicking shirts that I've stitched out, I've found that a 0.5 to 0.55 pitch seems to work pretty well. All right, corners. You have 3 types of corners in Ethos. You have corners on. This is what it looks like right here. Gives you a nice mitered corner. Most lettering, I like a mitered corner look. I think it looks very professional. Gives it a nice quality. But if my lettering is going to be very small, 1/4 of an inch or less, remember what we talked about at the beginning, where we don't want the column width to get too narrow? Well, it's the same thing here. If I'm dealing with very small lettering, then I want to turn off my corners, and I want it to turn. Okay? Now, if I'm doing a zigzag, a very, very open stitch for applique, I can use the 3rd one, which is called block corners. It sews all the way to the edge and then all the way down. And it locks it in right here on this corner. That's fine for an open, very open stitch, but for something that's normal, you're going to get a bump right here in your embroidery because you've got too many stitches there. All right, that's block corners. Now, short longs, there's really never a time when you want short longs turned off. What it does, just so you know, is when you've got a very curved design, well, you don't want the same number of stitches on the outside as you do on the inside of, let's just say you've got a donut shape. You'll get too many on the inside if you have the same number. So short long says, okay, well, every few stitches I'm going to drop a short one in. That way the inside doesn't get too bulky and bulked up for you. Okay? So that's what short long does. Compensation. You can use percentage or millimeter. If you're working with percentage, I usually start at about 15. Now, we had a question, do we have to change these every time? What I would recommend doing is, if you're changing these, change it first, save it as a template, and you don't have to change it every time. So you can don't do any design, just go in and edit your stitch effect. Once you get it all set up, say okay, save this as a template, and that will save those effect settings with you, so you don't have to change it each time. Otherwise, yes, you would have to change it each time. A side note to that is, if you're to the point where you're changing your own stitch effect settings, which I hope you get to that point, when you use finalized design to finish the checkerboard to finish off your design, skip the set base fabric part. Cancel out of that part, because that will change these settings on you. So if you've already gone, if you go in here and change these settings, then you go to set base fabric and you pick toweling, well, it's going to be different than what these settings are right here, and it's going to change it to toweling. Now, so back to here, if I'm doing comp, I use 15. Now what that means is that's going to spread those stitches out. It's going to make them wider than they would normally be. Basically what you're saying is, you know what, you're a satin stitch, I know you're going to pull in, I'm going to compensate for that and spread you out a little further. If you're using the millimeter, Don't use 15. That'll be way too much. It'll look crazy for you. Use 1, 2, 3, somewhere around there. Okay? You have 11 underlay choices. Tacking to triple zigzag. Tacking means no underlay. That's the lowest you can go. Single is good for small lettering. Zigzag is the default. That's where it always defaults to. If you feel like you just need a little bit more underlay, bump it down here to cross or piping. Actually, to be honest with you, I'm a big fan of the cross. Okay, that gives you a little bit nicer base to stitch on. Then, as you're going up to fabrics that need more underlay, they have a high nap, things like that. Use one of the some of the underlay on the right. Full zigzag to triple zigzag. The higher the nap, the more underlay you need, the higher underlay, the triple zigzag, the double zigzag, things like that. That's really going to give you a thick base to stitch on. Okay? Now, if you were using Satin Fill, everything is the same in there except this part down here is extra. 3 things that you can control when you're doing a Satin Fill seating. The most important is this one right here. What this tells the software is that anytime your column width from here to here gets longer than this number, it's going to drop a needle penetration in. So if you want to bump this number up to say 6, that's usually the threshold. I don't like to go, I really don't like my satin ever to be wider than 8, but just to give myself some playroom, if I'm going to adjust this, I'm going to adjust it up to 6. And then I normally don't go I never go down on this, or very rarely. I can't think of any time I go down. I will occasionally go up, but never down. You can. Okay? Pattern offset. That just is going to give you a unique pattern of your needle penetrations. Well, 33% is the most random. Okay? So, you know, that's a good one to leave it at 33. And then random seating length. That just means that if you have that turned on, this pattern offset, the stitch length is gonna alternate. It's gonna jump around, okay, so that you don't see the penetrations as much. Again, probably don't use it very often. I'm going to show you here what's going to happen at 4. Well, first off, at 4, you're probably not going to get any extra needle penetrations in here because nothing gets to 4 as far as my width. If I measure under Tools and Show Length from here to here, see, I'm at 3.63, so I've not gotten to 4 yet. That's why it's making it just a regular old basic satin, not doing anything. Now, as this gets larger, now I'm going to zoom in here. Now look, now I'm starting to see my needle penetrations. Look down through here. See those dots, kind of like dots that you see right there? Those are my seating needle penetrations. Again, if it doesn't need it, it won't put it in. Look at the end of my S right here. Okay? There's no extra needle penetrations right through there because it didn't get to that 4 threshold. Here, it's starting to drop in needle penetrations because it made it to that 4. As this number goes up, my stitch count will decrease. Look, now look at my S. Again, a regular satin until I get into this wide area down here. And now it's starting to drop in needle penetrations. You can see them through there, and you can see them through there. Okay? That's what I like about the satin seating. If it doesn't need it, it's not going to put it in. But if it does, like see how it needed a couple right in here, it will add that. So it's a very safe stitch to use when you're right on the verge of being too small or too big. All right? So that's another way that we can edit our stitch effect, our satin lettering. To use the stitch graduator, we're going to go here to this icon. It's usually under Finalize Design. Excuse me, it's the last icon on the left-hand toolbar. Now, in Stitch Graduator, you can go in and make your changes. Yes, the question was bringing in, can we bring in a .hus file? That's a Husqvarna file, and yes, you can bring that in. When you go to Design Import, you choose Alien DOS. You just go up the list until you see Husqvarna, and you'll see that format. Now, Stitch Graduator tool, this is how you increase or decrease the size of an existing stitch file. Okay? This is not the way you increase or decrease the size on a file that you have digitized in the software. All right? First off, in your Stitch Graduator tool, all of this part does is tell you information about the design. The name, the size, the stitch count. Okay? Down here is where we start making our adjustment. We want to increase this design. I can just do the width and it does the height proportionately for me. You can see up here that it's changed it, and it's changed the stitch count. I say OK. 20% is a good, safe increment, up or down. More than that, I need to evaluate the design and make sure it can handle more of an adjustment. I'm not a fan of saying, okay, I did 20%, now let me do another 20%, and so on. I like to go ahead and figure out what I need it to be, and then make one adjustment. Okay? The more you go in and transform it, the more distorted your design is going to get. Okay? It's not an unlimited amount of changes that you can make here. The more you do, the more you're going to see some distortion, and the more your stitches are going to lose some of the quality. Okay? So if I already know what setting I want to make it, I'll just increase it or decrease it until I reach that setting and just do it the one time. Now, if I need to do it out of proportion, I can just do the height, and you can see it's not messing with the width. So this is how I do it out of proportion. Okay? If, let's say I want to change just the red, So I grab it and put a box around it. I go into my stitch graduator, and look, it's only going to graduate. Selected blocks is now turned on. Now, when I make changes, it's only going to affect that part right there. Now, let's say that I'm not really concerned with making it bigger or smaller, but I need to adjust some of my stitch settings. Down here is where I can adjust stitch settings without changing the size. Now, this particular design doesn't have any fill or step stitches, and it doesn't have any running stitches. It only has satin. With our manipulation, some of this satin lettering has gotten too narrow. I can adjust the density or the width. We're going to come in here and increase this to 115. Now watch what happens to this lettering right here when I increase it. It starts to get thicker. Okay? So I can go in, thicken this up, say okay, and that will start. But look, we've made a lot of distortions on this. You can start to see that we are starting to distort. Okay? But that is how you can go in and use the Stitch Graduator tool.